Hi all. In this lesson, we are going to discuss about Angular lifecycle. When we consider a component, each component or directive has a lifecycle that start when Angular instantiated the component class and render the component view along with its child run view. Lifecycle continue with change direction and these kind of operations, and when the Angular destroy the component instance and remove the rendered template when the lifecycle ends. You can interact with Angular lifecycle of component or directive by implementing one or more of lifecycle hooks. These lifecycle hooks method are implemented in interfaces in Angular core module. We can implement those interfaces and use to interact with the Angular component. When we consider about interfaces defined in that Angular core module, each of these interfaces have prototype of single hook method. For example, when we consider a interface called onChange, it has a prototype function called ngOnChange. And when we consider about onInit interface, it has a function called ngOnInit. So, how this name appears? When the interface, when we consider the method name, it always has the prefix with the interface name. So, as example, doCheck interface has ng doCheck. OnInit interface has ng OnInit method. So, these are the list of Angular lifecycle events. To use these lifecycle events, we can implement relevant lifecycle interfaces. Okay. Now, this is the order that lifecycle hooks are triggered. Let's see how this is working. For that, I have created a new application to show you that how to use these Angular hooks and how to implement those things. So there I will create two components, which is parent component, name is my parent component, and ng generate component my parent, and another component my child. I have created two components, which is my parent component and my child component. I will use my parent component inside my app component, and inside my parent component I will use my child component. I will do some small changes also in my child component. For future purposes, I will add it here ng content. I will show what is it is later. Okay, now I can run this application. I will specify a port number here since my 4200 port is in use. When I go to my parent component, there's a what are the lifecycle hooks which we are considering is constructor, onChange, onInit, doCheck, onDestroy. Actually, these dark gray color lifecycle hook methods are relevant to our parent component. And if there is a child component, these methods will invoke when the child component view is presented in our parent component. Let's add input here. Using this input annotation, you can use to pass properties. I will send a string properties to our component. So in my app component, I will pass the value. Okay, now my application is running. What I have done is I pass app item to my parent component. In my parent component, I get an input item here. So let's see in constructor whether this item is came here. Okay, when you see our console here, we are in constructor method, so it says undefined. That means input value is not came when the application runs in the constructor. What I want to show you is this kind of initiations and some data bindings need to have a specific point to execute when Angular runs over its component lifecycle. So if you are dealing with this item in constructor, definitely it will gives you some errors in your application. So these kind of things should handle in after on init. So after your application instantiate a component or directive by calling its constructor, Angular calls the hook method you have implemented at the appropriate point in lifecycle of that instance. And Angular execute those hook methods in some sequence. If you have used them to perform some kind of task. For example, here I have implement my onInit interface, and here is the my hook method ng onInit. If I copy this code here and onInit, let's see, you can see that constructor is still undefined, but in onInit the input value is came there. That binding already happens. So in what is the purpose of ng onInit is to bound properties and set directive or component input properties to that relevant variable. Let's see how our interfaces can implement in our component. I will add all interfaces here on change, do check, after content init, after content checked. After view init, after view checked, and on destroy. On destroy. After adding implement interfaces, you will see that there is it showing an error because as I said earlier, all these interfaces contains uh, hook methods and we have to implement those hook methods. So constructor ng on it will write ng on changes here and ng do check ng after content init ng after content checked ng after view init ng after view checked ng destroy. Sorry, after adding ng destroy, our all hook methods are added to our app my parent component. Now we can see after refreshing our application, its console login our statement as we added. First constructor ng on change, ng on it, then do check, then after content init, after content checked, after view init, and after view checked. So if we have removed our parent component, it also appears here that on destroy lifecycle hook method as discussed. Order is same as this, and let's go to our code and see when these hook method are invoked. At first, it runs constructor. Normally, when Angular application create that component by calling new on the class, Angular invoked constructor method. And if you have input values in your component, like this item with input decorator, if you are getting input values to your component after the constructor, ng on change is invoking. So that's why in our example, ng on change is invoked after the constructor. If we do not use that input value, let me show you. If you do not add that input, you can see that after the constructor, ng on init lifecycle hook method is invoked. So the other thing is, if this value change, every time that value change, it invoke the ng on change method. And ng on init function is only called once, and after first ng on change method called, it will call ng on init function. And sometimes if there is no input values in our component, ng on change value will not invoked, and that time also ng on init function will invoked. And do check function normally called immediately after ng on change function is invoked. So we will discuss ng after content init, after content checked, after view init, and after view checked later. And the ng on destroy lifecycle hook method that called immediately before Angular destroyed the directive or any other component. That means that for use of this on destroy lifecycle hook method is if we are subscribing to some object, and if we have to do some changes before destroying any of component, that should be do on this ng on destroy function. And also I forgot to say you that ng on init and constructor methods, when in our application we have to initiate some methods, and in initiate state we have to run some functionalities in our components. Most of them should run on our ng on init lifecycle hook method. You will see that kind of usage in our future lessons. For example, if we are getting some values through some http call, that that kind of functionalities definitely you have to run on your ng on init function. So Angular also instruct us to use this constructor only if there is a static initialization and dependency injection purposes only to use this constructor, and all other instantiation method and getting data method all should be do in ng on init. In another example I will show you how to get data which is passed to our input values. Mostly if there is some values, we have to capture changes of those variables, value changes. So that kind of things we are handling with ng on change lifecycle hook method. So I will show you how to do that. ng on change has parameters. So I will add this change. Just type is simple changes, and if we console this changes, you can see what kind of object pass into that parameter. So you can see that simple change object contains item, and in that item current value and previous value is there, and also is it a first change or not. Here previous value is undefined, and since it is the first change, it's set it as true, and current value the currently added value. And I will show you with another example in app component. I'm also going to implement here on init. If you implement in on init, we have to add ng on init method here. Set time. I will set timeout for 3 seconds, and after 3 seconds I will change my app item value to app item input value 2. So this will change a item variable value after 3 seconds of running this function. So let's see how ng on init will triggers after that. Now you can see it already changed. So the previous values is app item input value, and it is not a first change, and the current value is item input value 2. You can see that if we change our value in some point, it will automatically triggers our ng on change function. So this functionality we can use to get our changes on variables. Okay, now I am going to show you how to use that ng after content init and ng these four method of life cycle hook methods, how to use these things. Uh, con- Content init, and you can see there is some special thing. This is ng after is common, and content init, content checked, and view init and view checked. What is this content and what is this view? Before going further, also we need to know about some decorator called viewChild. ViewChild is a decorator which we use to get a reference to our child component template or child component instance. So I will explain how this is working, and the decorator is we called viewChild. In viewChild, it required one parameter, and that parameter should contain the type of the view we are looking for. So in my parent component, I have one child called my child component. So I am going to get a reference to this my child component, and here so type of my child component is my child component, and variable name I set as my child component, and again type of that variable is my child component. That viewChild decorator says to Angular that you have to bind the instance of my child component to this my child component variable. So that is happening here. After Angular binds to that object to my child component, we can access this child. So in my constructor method, rather than login item files, I will add this dot my child component, and let's see what will happen. If you understood this correctly, you should know that it should be a undefined value. When we run the constructor, it just Angular create the component but not initiate the view of child components. So in to see the views, uh, the lifecycle hook method is after view init. That means after the view is initialized, this lifecycle hook method is running. So let's see, is it true? I will add this dot my child component to my console log execution, and I will compile it, and let's see. Now you can see after view init is login my reference to my child component. So this is the my child component. View checked is triggering when Angular check-in whether the initialized version, view and the state is correct or not. At that state, Angular triggered this method. Let's talk about ng after content return, ng after content checked, lifecycle hook methods. Uh, Content child and view child has almost similar concept, but the thing is content is little bit different from a directly view. Change is, if you remember, in my child component, I have added a tag called ng content here. So to see how that behaves, I will add another paragraph here and I will set this at start, and here I will add my child works end. Okay, and after that in my parent component, uh, between my tags in element tags, I will add a h1 tag calling custom content here. Okay, now if you see the application, you can see that here my child component is rendered, and which I passed from parent component, which is the custom content, is appeared where I was added ng content. So that is the concept of ng content. When we consider the content children or content child of a given component, child element are projected into component from a host component is called content components. So I will show it to you. Rather than adding h1 tag here, I will add another component from host. Since this is my parent component, this is my host of my child component. Rather than adding a h1 tag here, I will add another component here. For now, my purpose, there's no created component here, so I will create one. This is the same as normal component. Ng generate component, I will name it as content child, and my child will create. So I will add app content child here, and what is I am doing is sending this component as a content. So then Angular my child component will render that content child component here. In our application, you can see that content child works is appears in between start and end of my child works tags. Now what I have to do is, that is, content is rendering inside my child component. So in my child component, I can access to that content child instance using the decorator content child. Same as view child decorator, content child decorator also accepting the type of the component. Component name is content child component, and I'm asking Angular to bind content child component type component to content child component variable, which is type also content child component, and same as the view child component. invoked after that view content init and view content check. So I will implement view content, okay, after content init and after content checked. To implement those in, I have to override the methods which are ng after content init and also ng after content checked. So if I console log here my content child component, you can see now content child component also login here. Okay, that is what about lifecycle hooks. And I ask you to go through this tutorial again and again since this is very important topic, and I separated this lesson to another project since you can come and see this tutorial again and again without knowing the other part of the lesson.